Greetings viewers, EricTheCarGuy here. It's summertime and it's hot, and the air conditioning in the GSR that I just got isn't quite working up to par, so I thought I'd make a video about how to top off your AC system. Now I'm going to start this out by saying, okay, AC work for the DIY is kind of a slippery slope. It requires a lot of specialized skills and sometimes specialized tools, and you kind of got to know what you're doing. You can't just go at this. So I'm going to post links in the description to videos I've done previously about how AC systems operate. Also a video about AC performance diagnosis so you can see how well your AC is working. But if your AC is working and it's not quite getting as cool as it used to, this video may help you. That's what I'm putting this out for. So please keep that in mind. But if you have other issues, the AC isn't coming on or any of that kind of stuff, this will not help you. So see the description for additional information there. Let's get started. Oh yeah, safety glasses. We're going to be working on AC. We want these. First, let's start with a little bit of that performance testing that I told you I had a video linked to in the description. As you can see here, it's about 95-ish degrees in the shop today, so it's pretty toasty. So we'll be able to get a pretty good idea of how well the air conditioning can work. Relative humidity also has a lot to do with this, and I can't really say what it is now. I'd say probably in the 80%-ish, somewhere around that area. It's not necessarily high humidity, but there is a certain amount of humidity. The more humid it is, the less efficient your air conditioning is going to be. So the expectations as far as the temperature difference that you're going to see are going to be based on, one, how hot it is, and two, how much humidity. But for a baseline, let's see what the AC is doing now before we get started. Now I'm just going to turn this on low. I've got it on these center vents. Slide this in here. We'll just rev the engine to about 2,500 RPM. Well, it looks like we're doing really good right now, all things considered. It looks like it's come down to about 49 degrees, which honestly is, well, bordering on excellent. But I'm going to try to see if I can get it a little better. And if nothing else, I'm going to show you what to look for that could possibly make it better. Over here on the bench, I have a set of AC gauges. These are set up for 134, which anything made after 96 is going to have a 134A system. They have these special ends on them, checking high and low pressure, and also the charge hose is what that is sometimes called. This measures the pressures inside the AC system, and if you follow those links in the description to those videos about this, you can see why that is important, because the AC works on the pressures within the system, going from a high pressure to a low pressure. This is the high side, this is the low side. This is what I recommend you do this with over something like this, which, as you can see, has no gauge on it. Now, some of these do come with gauges on them. As far as when you go to recharge. So these are just cans of refrigerant here that you can purchase at your local auto parts store. Now, the reason why I'm advocating using a gauge set over something like this, or even something like this with just a low pressure gauge, is I like to know what's going on in the high pressure as well as the low pressure. Any of these just come with low pressure gauges. One more thing, as far as topping it off and the type of refrigerant you're using, there are many varieties that you can choose from at the auto parts store. However, I've gotten to a point to where I just use straight refrigerant. And I do this a lot at the shop. I'm not advocating that you get something like this. But personally, I've come to like the fact that this is just pure refrigerant, as opposed to these other things that may have sealers or dyes or oil or other things in here that could possibly adversely affect some of the refrigerant or oils or dyes that are already in the system. It's just been my experience. So I prefer just straight refrigerant over anything else. Step one, however, is we're going to hook up our gauges and observe the pressures that we have inside the system while it's running. You may have noticed that I've lowered the hood a bit on the Integra, and part of the reason is so I have a better place to hang the gauge set. Once you have the gauges in this position, the next thing to do is to find the high and low ports on the system. And on this car, we've got a low side here and a high side here. And we'll remove the caps and attach the gauge set. Before we get started, make sure both of these valves are closed. The low side port is going to be on a big hose, I call it, and the high side port is usually on a small hose. But you kind of can't mix these up because they make these fittings here only go on one way. So that's helpful. Don't lose the caps. And with these, you can pull up on the coupler. Sometimes you can just push them right down, but I just pull up on the coupler and make sure it's locked into place. Next, I'm going to start to slowly run the valve in. And I'm going to keep an eye on the gauge, and as soon as the gauge starts to move, I want to stop, because if you run this all the way down, there's a chance that you could damage the valve inside of here, and you do not want to do that, because once you disconnect everything, it could cause a leak. Therefore, you want to run this down slowly until you see the needle move on the gauge. All right, as I said, I'm going to slowly turn the knob until I see the needle move. Once I see the needle move, I'm going to stop. You don't need to run it all the way down. Once that needle moves, it means that the hose is connected and you are tied into the system. Going to do the same thing on the high side. Once again, just turn the knob slowly until you see the gauge move. Now that time it didn't move all that much. Now that the gauges are hooked up and tied into the system, I'm going to start it up and observe the pressures. So that wasn't all the way in. That seems more reasonable. These pressures don't look that bad, but you don't want to look at them just at idly. You want to rev it up. One of the reasons why I said that I wanted to look at the high side as well as the low side, because the difference between this pressure and this pressure are what's going to make it colder. On a day like today where it's about 90-some degrees, I mean, the humidity is high but not too high. I want to see high side pressures somewhere above 200, somewhere 200, 250 range. And the low side, well, that should, actually it looks pretty good where it is. It'll probably go down to about 20 when I rev the engine. So I'm going to do that now and we'll see where they end up. So we didn't quite reach 200. One real important check before you really get into this is make sure both cooling fans are functioning, especially the smaller or condenser fan. If those aren't working, they could be the reason why your AC isn't performing as good as it should. As I said, I'd like to get these pressures up above 200 on the high side, and I'm going to add a little bit of refrigerant in order to accomplish that. I'm going to do that through the charge hose here in the center. Now, I'm going to be using this large tank of refrigerant here. As I said, I like to use refrigerant that doesn't have any additives to it. But if you're at the auto parts store and you want these smaller cans, which are much more economical, you can use one of these piercing type valves. This can actually started out like this, and you screw this valve down on top of here, and then you run this in, and when you do, it pierces the top of the can and allows the refrigerant to come out. Some cans, like this one here, have this hose setup. Well, even with this type of setup, you can unscrew this and you have the same type of end on here. You could use this same valve to pierce this can. Some cans are also shorter than this. These are some of the big cans, but some cans are about half this size. And if you're just topping it off, maybe a small can might be better for you. So this valve has a needle that comes down and pierces the top of the can so that you can get access to the refrigerant inside. Then you hook this fitting up to the charge hose. So if I was going to use this valve, I'd run the needle all the way out, screw this on the top of the can, then I'd run the needle all the way in, hook it up to my charge hose, then I'd unscrew this again after the needle was run in, and then the refrigerant would be free to flow through the charge hose into the manifold gauge. So I'm using this large canister of refrigerant. So I'll just take my charge hose and hook it directly up to that, and make sure that it has a plastic O-ring or something like that down in there, because if it doesn't, this stuff can leak out. So I'm going to run this in, and then I'm going to open the valve. Now I'm going to take this can and turn it upside down, because a liquid refrigerant will settle towards the bottom. If I was charging with one of these, I would also hold the can upside down while I charged it. Now refrigerant is free to flow through the charge hose into the manifold gauge set. However, this entire hose is now filled with air, and we want to purge that air. In order to do that, I'm just going to loosen up this fitting. You can also push this Schrader valve, but I've just gotten in the habit of loosening up this fitting here. until I see refrigerant coming out, and then I'll close it up. So just a small amount. You just want to purge the air out of the hose. It gets cold and you see that refrigerant come out, that's all you need to do. So now you know where you have refrigerant going up into the manifold gauge. This next part is where it gets tricky, because you don't know exactly how much refrigerant is going into the system. You only want to do it in small amounts. So I'm going to open up the low side valve. Never charge on the high side, only the low side. Open up the low side valve just for a few seconds, let a little bit of refrigerant go in, then I'm going to recheck the pressures. So here we go. A little bit of refrigerant going in here, and you'll see it go through the sight glass also. That's all I'm going to add for now. You can already see that the high side is starting to come up a little bit more. Now I'm going to raise the RPM to that 2500 and see where my high side gauge is. Okay, it looks like we topped out like almost 225, which is way better than what it was. So now let's go check that vent temperature and see if that got any better. Okay, I can already see that it's a little bit better than it was before, and I haven't even started revving it up. Before we got down to about 49 degrees. It's hard to see in the blue there, but let's raise the RPMs and see how low we can get it to go. It's hard to see. Take a closer look at this. Actually, it looked to me like I got it down to just a little above 40. It does feel better, I can say that. Is a slight improvement over what we had, but with air conditioning, a slight improvement is still an improvement. You will likely get more dramatic results if your system is a little bit lower, but I'm actually pretty happy with this. Now, as I said, I'm happy with this. There comes a point where it's diminishing returns. You only want to add a little bit at a time. If you add too much, it can be just as bad as not having enough. Aside from that, I'm going to take all the refrigerant that's still in this hose and put that into the system, so that's a little bit of an extra charge that we'll have. And this is how I'm going to do that. First, I'm going to close off the valve on the tank. Now, I'm going to open the low side valve and it'll draw any of the refrigerant that's still in the hose back into this system, which there really wasn't much at all. You can close that off, and now I can be reasonably certain that all the refrigerant is out of the hose. If you're using this type, which you probably are, run the valve all the way back down in. That will seal the can back up, and you can do the exact same thing that I just did with the big can here. Now, as you'll see, when I remove this hose, you won't have a bunch of stuff spraying out. If I didn't do that, whatever was left in the hose would spray out there. Still going up to 225 on the high side and just a little bit like 19, 18, around that on the low side. I'm pretty happy with that. And we saw what the result was inside the car. Now that we're topped off and satisfied with the pressures, I'm going to disconnect the gauge set from the system. I've got a couple of notes here for you. So with this low side fitting, you turn it counterclockwise until it bottoms out. It doesn't matter if you bottom it out here. Then pull back on the coupling and it'll release from the line. Now here's the note I want to leave with you. What you may notice is you may see refrigerant bubbling out of here when you disconnect the gauges. That's okay for a little while. If it continues on past 5 minutes or so, then you probably still have a leak in there. But if you don't see anything, like I don't see anything here on this, you're probably okay. But initially, when you first remove the valves, it's not uncommon to have a little bit of refrigerant still bubbling up here. With these Schrader valves, what happens sometimes is they hang open a little bit and cause very small, tiny leaks. What I do to help prevent this is I blip the valves before I put the caps on. So in other words, I'll go in with a small pocket screwdriver like what I have here, and just very quickly clear the valve. And that usually helps reset the valve into the proper position. If there's any kind of debris or anything that might have gotten introduced into the system, it could hold the valve in slightly. That little blipping, as I call it, helps clear that valve out and helps prevent leaks. And do the same thing with the high side fitting. Unscrew it all the way. And the high side's going to have some pressure behind it, so it might kick back at you a little bit. Once again, I'm going to look for any of that boiling that might be happening. I don't see it, but all the same, I'm going to blip the valve real quick. Now I'm going to put the caps back on. These help keep debris out. They do seal a little bit. Shut the engine off, we're all set. Well, there you have it, a step-by-step on how to get your AC to work a little bit better. Can't stress enough on how your AC system needs to be functioning properly to start with before you begin. As I said, if you get a manifold gauge set like this, you can look at the pressures. I like to see a high side pressure on a warm day like today up above 200. We got it to 225. We actually got a couple more degrees out of that. So there wasn't much that leaked out, also added in small amounts. Once again, I'll mention that I have links in the description to additional videos I have about the operation of an AC system, how to check for leaks, how to charge it from nothing, performance testing, all that stuff, including an article that I wrote on my website about checking out any other HVAC problems. AC can get kind of tricky, can get kind of dicey, so I'm hoping this helps, but if you get in over your head, I recommend taking it to a professional. Anyway, I'm going to put a link in the description to EricTheCarGuy.com in addition to all the other information that I mentioned. Google+, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, if you wish to connect with me socially. I close each of my videos with, of course, be safe, have fun, stay dirty, and cool. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.